Hi, I'm Lee Davey. Welcome to the Alcohol Addiction Podcast. I am not an alcoholic and I refuse to be anonymous. And today my guest is Aeden Smith. How's life, Aeden?
Pretty good. Past 5 years for me have been pretty wild. So how about you?
I'm feeling absolutely fantastic.
Nice.
Last 5 years have also been pretty wild, but you tell me about yours. What's been going on the past 5 years?
Well, I got pretty heavily involved with a substance called Ibogaine.
Mm.
And it's a psychedelic drug from Africa that's primarily used for drug detox, which is what brought me into it. I was a drug addict for many years, the better half of my life, and finally I found some success by using this plant medicine.
When you say you as a drug addict, what were the type of drugs that you were taking at the time?
Everything in the book. Let's see, by sixth grade, I had drank my first alcoholic beverage. A friend of mine and I were walking home from school, and somebody had stashed some beer in the woods on the way home from school on the path we used to walk by. So we made note of it, and later on, maybe a month or so later, I had an argument within my family, and I ran off in the middle of the night, and I decided to try these Budweiser cans, which were probably expired at the time. And I drank it. It tasted nasty, and it gave me a buzz and kind of gave me my first insight to why what alcohol is and why people drink it. And later in the year, I tried a cigarette, which gave me a crazy head buzz, and I started understanding what other substances do other than what the DARE program had taught me in elementary school, which I later found out was a lot of lies involved with that program, and actually made me more curious as to what drugs did in the first place. So I tried cigarettes and I got a buzz, not understanding that, like with heroin, once you're addicted to it, you stop getting that buzz and you're not doing it for fun anymore. And by sixth grade, I had smoked marijuana. By seventh and eighth grade, I tried cocaine, acid, mushrooms. By ninth grade is when I tried crack cocaine, got into heroin, and eventually got expelled from high school in my second year. My parents at that point had sent me around all around the country from the United States, from Maine to Georgia to Texas, and then back to Massachusetts. And I never found really any luck with those programs, the traditional rehabs. A lot of them were just lockdown facilities made to teach you a lesson instead of trying to actually help you, and prescribe all sorts of medications that, especially to a developing mind, probably didn't help me growing up a whole lot. So that took a couple of years out of my life, probably about 3 years, and I turned 18, and I started drinking alcohol again at that point, started smoking pot again, and when I turned 21, celebrating my 21st birthday, I got arrested, and I was put on probation where I wasn't drug tested, but I was breathalyzed, so I could no longer drink alcohol, or I would be taking a major risk of going to jail if I got with alcohol in my system. So at that point, I kind of substituted onto a different downer and started taking a lot of opiate pills. And at a certain point, I would need, roughly 120 milligrams of Oxycontin to get well, to be able to function. And in Massachusetts at that time, I don't even know what it is now, but it was about $1 a milligram. So that's $120 a day, if not more, on a good day, just to be well and to be able to function. And eventually, I had tried heroin and found out that a $5 bag did the same exact thing as that $120. So even though the word heroin has a wicked stigma attached to it, I did make the transition to heroin, which, it saved my pocket a lot of money, but not necessarily my lifestyle or my health. And this went on for several years, and I lost everything, started selling everything I owned, ran away from home, was living out of a car in the middle of winter in Massachusetts, which has some pretty brutal winters. I'd have to turn the car on every half hour or so to let it heat up just so I didn't freeze to death. And it was a pretty miserable way to live. And how I was getting my drugs at that point, which, I would still do everything in the book, but opiates just took hold, unlike any of the other substances did. I would still smoke pot and drink alcohol, but they didn't affect me like the opiates did. If I didn't have my opiates, I was not able to function. That's when I started to realize that I needed help. Even more so when I crashed the car that I was living in, which was my friend's vehicle. And that was also my source of getting my drugs. I would need to I come from a pretty liberal, middle-class city, which is, pretty clean. And I would have to go south to these two cities that, Holyoke and Springfield, Massachusetts, actually where volleyball was invented in Holyoke and basketball was invented in Springfield. And both of these cities have since become crime-ridden, gang-affiliated cities that are pretty dangerous to go to. And a lot of people from my neighborhood would not want to venture down there just because of the fears of getting robbed, even though they have these giant buildings called the Block, which anybody can just walk into and go buy drugs. And, the police won't go in the building and bust people. They'll just bust people walking in and out of the building. So I would take the risk. I would round up everybody's money in the morning or even make multiple trips and drive down to Holyoke or Springfield, pick up a bunch of drugs, bring them back, put some gas money in my car, get some McDonald's for something to eat, and then tax the drugs. So I was basically doing the drugs for free. Well, I was going on a mission and taking a risk, so it wasn't exactly free. And then I crashed the car, and everybody who I was getting the drugs for realized that they could go down and just get the drugs themselves, and many of which have gotten arrested down there since, and some of them aren't with us anymore because it's an epidemic up there, and people are dying left and right. And I was lucky to get out when I was able to get out. And so I crashed the car, and at that point I realized that I couldn't support my habit anymore. I had no job. My unemployment checks had run out. And I needed help. And at this point in my life, unlike when I was a teenager, going to all those programs, I actually wanted the help this time. I wanted the change. And I was willing to try different methods to get there. And my parents had mentioned getting on Suboxone or methadone, which are two opioid pharmaceutical drugs that don't really get you off of the heroin or what other opiate you're using. It's basically just a substitution. And instead of giving a drug dealer my money, I would now be giving a large pharmaceutical company my money. So I really wasn't solving the problem, just substituting onto something. And, for some people it works for them because, it's not as detrimental to their health. They don't have to live the same type of lifestyles. For some people it can work, but for me and all my friends around me, they either continued using drugs while they're on it, or they would sell it to get more drugs. And I just didn't want that to be me. I really wanted to change at this point. And I had heard Ibogaine, heard about it in my middle school years when I was experimenting with psychedelic substances like LSD and mushrooms and DMT. And I always wanted to try Ibogaine recreationally at that point, but it's not something you can just go down to your local drug dealer and say, hey, you got any Ibogaine? So the idea popped back into my head when my parents and I were trying to figure out what kind of help I was going to get and what we were looking for. And eventually my dad found a place in Mexico that did Ibogaine, and I spoke to the owner several times over the phone, who prepped me on what I needed to do before coming, like eating healthy, making sure alcohol was out of my system, making sure there was no Suboxone or methadone in my system, at which point, I wasn't on any opiate blockers or long-acting opiates, so that wasn't an issue. And in 2012, November 2012, so it's just about a 5-year mark right now, I went to Mexico to do Ibogaine treatment, and I had a wonderful experience. I mean, the actual psychedelic experience wasn't the most pleasant in the world, but it needed to be that way. It taught me a lesson. It kind of threw me into, I would say, a dark place, and made me look at a lot of the ugly that was in my life. That was me, that I had suppressed in the back of my head because I didn't want to accept or admit that this ugly was in me. Stuff that deep down I knew, but I would just never want to admit to myself because of my own ego and things like that, and shame. Admitting that stuff, it brings a lot of shame on you. And it kind of threw it in my face and made me look at it. And this is anything from how I was treating my friends, how I was treating myself, the people around me, just kind of being a scumbag in general, something which I have a lot of regrets for. But I've also been able to make a lot of amends because of this. And by the end of my experience, I just felt like I didn't deserve life to be here, because I'd done all these bad things in my life. But then the medicine, it kind of told me that, after all that, we're going to give you a second shot. And I came out of the experience just, the sun was coming up over the ocean, something that if I was still high on dope, I probably never would have been able to appreciate. Be able to appreciate that I have a family that loves me, a roof over my head, food in my stomach. And, having been in Mexico, you see a lot of the poverty around. And there's, you U.S. citizen living in Massachusetts, I am privileged when I compare myself to some of these people down here that are struggling just to get, food in their stomach.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really eye-opening, not just the Ibogaine, but even going to Mexico in general, just really put a lot of perspective on my life and how thankful I should really be to have gotten the experiences that I need. And since then, I met a girl who she worked at the general hospital, and she raises money for children with cancer. And I remember the first time she brought me up to see those kids with cancer. It was a really tough experience for me because these kids are struggling with something that's killing them. Half of them don't even know what cancer is, but they're fighting. And here I was all these years just destroying my body. Something that they would kill to have is just a healthy body. And I just felt really selfish.
Mm. Okay. Thanks for sharing that. It's one hell of a ride. My last 5 years have not been like that, Aeden. Just one thing, your video shakes a little bit. I don't know.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I don't know if your
That's
hands
my
on your lap.
arms on the table.
Yeah. Okay. It's interesting there that alcohol is the gateway drug, right?
Oh, absolutely.
I saw so many people because it's free, not free, because it's legal.
Socially acceptable.
Yeah, it's illegal. It's socially acceptable. People think that alcohol, drinking it is normal and pleasurable. And of course it isn't. It's an illusion. It's a joke.
Mm-hmm.
And once you start drinking alcohol, it really does put you in situations whereby you are going to be, it's going to be suggested to you that you could try these other things. Whereas you're less likely to do it if you're not drinking. If you're sober and someone comes up to you and says, take this pill, you're less likely to do it than if you're drunk because you've lost all your inhibitions at that point.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that's important. On the Ibogaine itself, I want you to talk a little bit about, you said the medicine told you. Almost like Ibogaine is an entity. What I can't get my head around, and people listening to this who've never heard of Ibogaine before, let's just go back a little bit. Okay. What exactly does Ibogaine do to start off with?
Okay, so Ibogaine, when you ingest it, your liver metabolizes it into another substance called Ibogaine. And Ibogaine is a substance that actively singles out receptors in your brain and bonds to those receptors, even for months at a time. I've heard anywhere from 3 months to 6 months, and in that amount of time, it repairs a lot of the damage that was done to them over the years through substance abuse. So it gets your endorphins flowing naturally again without the use of a foreign substance, like your dopamine and your serotonin. They go back to a pre-addictive state. So in that sense, it gives you a head start into your recovery because you don't have to go through the obsession, the depression, all of the negative side effects and symptoms of going through withdrawal or in traditional treatment that make you want to give up, after a matter of days of being locked up in there. It puts you past that. And the way I like to describe Ibogaine is it puts you 6 months into recovery in roughly a day or two, which is just mind-blowing. A lot of people just say, that couldn't happen, that doesn't exist, but it really is wild stuff. When you see some of the people that get off the plane and come down to see us, when they get off the plane, some of them weigh 100 pounds. They look like Skeletor, just, bones. They're pale. And you look at some of these people and you say, if they stayed out on the street a couple more months, or if they didn't have family that got them down here, they might not have made it. And it's, you watch them transition in literally a night or two, and the color comes back in their face. They're dealing with their emotions again, something that a lot of them haven't experienced in years. So they have to deal with good emotions and bad emotions. So you see them go through a lot immediately after treatment, from having to deal with happiness, sadness, regret, anxiety, all these emotions that have been numb for so long. And you get to see it, and it's actually a pretty beautiful experience to see. It's almost like watching somebody get born again, but being born as an adult. So it's a little different, having to relearn language.
I totally get what you're saying. You're helping somebody to save their life in a way, and so I totally understand that. Talk me through. Let's say I arrive at your clinic, and I'm about to undergo treatment. Talk me through the process. What's going to happen to me when I get there? Am I going to be? I assume I'm going to have to be restrained because I'm going to be kind of tripping a little bit. Tell me about what's going to happen.
No, we've had a couple people freak out, maybe out of the past 1,500 patients we've had, excuse me, there's a loud vehicle going by. I'd say out of the past 1,500 patients that we've had over the past several years, maybe two, and I might be missing one or two, but only two people had an experience to the point where they couldn't handle it, and it was to the point where they weren't thinking on their right selves and making bad decisions. And a lot of those, both of those, there's chances that they had pre-existing psychological conditions that played a role into that, which is why before people even get here, we try to have them list off any known psychological conditions they have that they may know of, to try and avoid that. And now in both of those situations, we were able to stop the situation. One of the patients was getting violent and posing in some like karate type moves, and he was under the impression that we were not his friends, and he was very paranoid because Ibogaine is an extremely powerful substance, and if you're not experienced with psychedelics at all, for some people it can be an overwhelming experience, and that can bring in confusion and paranoia. And this patient was suffering to a pretty good degree, and most likely had some underlying issues that he was resisting. But we were able to give him a benzodiazepine, which counteracts the psychedelic aspect of the Ibogaine. So it's almost like an emergency stop button, and in the case that it is that intense. So when you arrive at the facility, day one is basically just getting settled in, getting to know the staff, other patients that are here. Maybe some have gone through the experience already, maybe others haven't, and start building bonds for the week that you're here. And a little after arriving, you do the intake with the doctor, who goes over a series of health questions to make sure that you're fit to do this treatment. And in the case that you're not fit to do this treatment, we just cannot take the risk and will not treat somebody. So the doctors go over a series of health questions, psychological questions, medications they may be taking. And then after that, we run different labs on them, like a liver enzyme test to make sure their cytoplasmic enzymes are functioning properly, the ones that metabolize Ibogaine and noribogaine. We also do an electrocardiogram to make sure their heart's functioning properly, since Ibogaine, especially in combination with other substances, can potentially be cardiotoxic. So we want to make sure that their heart is in tip-top condition, because if it's not, it's just not safe to treat somebody. So at that point, we would send somebody home. And we've only turned down a handful of people, but we're just not willing to take the risk if it's not safe enough to do the treatment. And we also do a urinalysis to make sure that they don't have any of the drugs in their system that could be dangerous with the Ibogaine. And some of those drugs are things like amphetamines, cocaine, alcohol you actually can't have in your system for roughly a week before coming down. Now, a lot of times when alcoholics come and see us, sorry, I don't really like that term, people who abuse alcohol, when they come and see us, we have to flush their system before the treatment. We got to hydrate them, give them gabapentin to make them stabilize so that they're not going through severe alcohol withdrawals, while their liver enzymes get back to normal, because the same liver enzyme that metabolizes alcohol is also the same one that metabolizes Ibogaine and noribogaine. So if those levels are off, it could potentially be dangerous. And we always double check with alcoholics too, because sometimes they have had cirrhosis to the liver, which can also be dangerous if they have any conditions. Like there are other liver conditions, like hepatitis C is another one that you really have to be careful of. So anyhow, if all these test results come back okay, which for most people, they do come back just fine, unless it's somebody who's been severely debilitating their body over 20 to 30 year period. You can imagine somebody who's been drinking a liter or two of whiskey every day for 20 years, their body's going to be seriously hurting when they get here. So, in those cases, sometimes people just aren't healthy enough to treat. But, if everything does come back okay, they begin treatment the following day. And depending on which doctor is facilitating the treatment, they'll either begin treatments in the morning or at night. Now, with opiate addicts, they are provided medication to keep them stable up until when the treatment begins, where they will need to start going into slight withdrawal. But when the treatment begins, everybody's in their own room, hooked up to a heart rate monitor with an IV solution in them, and the doctor administers what's called the test dose. And the test dose is just a small amount of Ibogaine to make sure you don't have any adverse or allergic reactions. And generally it takes, 30, 40 minutes to kick in, where the doctors can, see how sensitive they are to the medication and make sure that nothing's going wrong. And then based off the test dose and their body weight, they're administered what's called the flood dose. And the flood dose is what sends you into your experience, the psychedelic experience. But one note that I want to throw out there is that not everybody has a psychedelic experience from Ibogaine. Some people don't trip at all from it, which, for a lot of people, especially dealing with things like cocaine and amphetamines and alcoholism, once the withdrawal symptoms are gone, what you're looking for is that spiritual experience from the Ibogaine. Even though it still works on your neuroreceptors the same way and getting your endorphins going and gives you that sense of clarity post-treatment, if you're struggling with one of those substances and you don't get the psychedelic experience, it can be disappointing. We've had people disappointed from it. Because with opiate addicts, it actively singles out your opiate receptors, so that, somebody's using 2 grams or 3 grams of heroin a day doesn't have to go through opiate withdrawal, which is, the opiate addicts is just, it's, once again, it sounds too good to be true. But in the case that other people don't have the psychedelic experience, which many do, we had an alcoholic woman here about 2 weeks ago, who didn't use any other legal drugs. He actually looked at the woman and you wouldn't even believe that she was an alcoholic.
Right.
An older woman. It was really surprising to see somebody like that just, take a leap of faith and go and try this psychedelic substance in Mexico that you never heard before. You don't know if it works or not. And it was really cool to see her go through the experience. And when she came out of it, she just couldn't stop smiling. And we asked her about her experience, and all she would tell us is, I saw what I needed to see. So she got what she needed out of the psychedelic experience. But like I was saying, not everybody gets that. And so in instances where people don't get that, we have a shaman who comes in, and she or he, depending on which one it is, does a ceremony with something called 5-MeO-DMT, which is another psychedelic substance that comes from a toad that's indigenous to Central America that, native people have been using for thousands of years to have psychedelic and spiritual experiences and connect to the gods. And really, it's, I've tried this medicine before, and it is one of the most beautiful experiences you can have as a human being. It's, swinging on the spiral divinity while still being a human. It's absolutely a wild experience. And if I were to try and tell you about it, you'd think I sound crazy. So I won't even try.
Well, I do want you to try and explain it to me, because obviously, like, my psychedelic experiences are just very, very limited. Taking acid when I was a kid, and believe it or not, getting absolutely blind drunk in Amsterdam and smoking weed led to a psychedelic experience.
Oh yeah.
But both of which time, because I've only, let's say 5 times, I think 4 times of acid, once in Amsterdam. All my trips were really bad. So if I was to undergo Ibogaine treatment, would my mindset, thinking that my trip is going to be bad, lead to my trip being bad?
It's got potential, set and setting, mindset. They all play a role. Underlying psychological issues like trauma, or even just resistance to the medicine can cause a bad experience, because, a lot of times people just have never experienced what a psychedelic feels like. And I know from my own experience, the first few times I tried psychedelics, and I don't even know I would ever try them again after that, because they were pretty tough experiences. And it was just really overwhelming feelings of not having control, which I didn't like, because usually when I do drugs, I'm still in control. I'm having a good time. And, it's more like they're party drugs. As with psychedelics, you're not supposed to take them to get messed up. You're not supposed to take them to feel good. You're supposed to take them as a learning experience. So you got to have intention behind it when you take it. You don't just, take something like Ibogaine or acid and say, I'm, going to watch the Super Bowl with my buddies, because that would just not be a fun time at all. It's more of a time to really, it's a personal experience. So I always think doing psychedelics by yourself is good, just because you're really able to sit and focus on yourself, which can be extremely beneficial, because a lot of times when we're just in our day-to-day life, we don't take the time to sit down and think about who we are and what we're feeling and how to improve our lives. So it's tough to say if you would or wouldn't have a bad experience. There's definitely ways around that, like breathing exercises, meditation, yoga. stuff like that. And also learning about like your past experiences. Like, do you have any trauma that you need to face? And sometimes a bad trip is facing that trauma. Like for me, for instance, during my Ibogaine trip, it was miserable. I'm not going to lie. That was one of the most intense and miserable experiences of my life. But because it was that tough and I learned so much about myself, it made it so worth it. And also I've had, you know, plenty of other bad trips on mushrooms and acid, but I figure for every good trip, if you can actually have a good trip, it's worth 1,000 bad ones.
Well, I mean, with the Ibogaine one, I mean, I know somebody who took Ibogaine for heroin to get off heroin, and it worked. But and she did it twice actually. The first time was a really bad trip. Second time was a not so bad trip. But it's worth it, I guess, because at the end product is that you're no longer addicted to heroin. You don't want to take it anymore. You feel a completely different person, and you haven't gone through any withdrawal. What I can't connect in my head, and maybe you can help me, Aiden, by talking about your own experience, was how does your experience, your Ibogaine experience, result in you coming out the other end not wanting to partake in whatever drug that you used to partake in? I know you've talked about the biological side of it, but is there a psychological side of it as well? Is what happened during your trip?
Oh, absolutely. But that goes back to, you know, going through traditional rehabs when I was younger. I had said that they didn't really work for me, but a lot of that had to do with the fact that I was a teenager and I didn't want to change. And I thought I still had 20 years of partying left in me. When I came down to do the Ibogaine, like I was in a bad spot. I didn't want to be there anymore. It was miserable. And ever since, that's still been my motivation. Because, you know, sure, I remember what it's like to get high on heroin. You're never going to forget that. That's a curse. And yeah, it feels great. And, you know, I'm never going to forget that. You know, although at this point I don't think about it anymore, you're still never going to forget what that high is like. And I always just look back to where I came from, like living out of that car. It was absolutely miserable. You know, I can laugh about it now, but like in the moment, man, I had some pretty bad thoughts going through my head. Like, do I really want to put up with this anymore? Like thinking of possible ways out. And, yeah, I don't want to go back to that. Life has so much more to offer than getting messed up all the time. Like I said, just being able to come out of my treatment and walk outside and watch the sun come up, you know, it was absolutely amazing. Like it's something that I hadn't appreciated in, you know, 10 years. So yeah, I just think that you find interest and you find joy in other stuff that's not drugs, because there's so much out there. You know, I'm a musician. I love playing music. I mean, that's a high in itself. You know, even watching comedies and cooking and going out to eat, like there's so much to do. And it's just, when I was under the influence all the time, I wasn't doing any of that stuff. I was sitting in my room drooling on myself.
But if we go from the car to looking up and seeing the sunlight and then standing there and thinking, wow, in between that is this experience you've had in Mexico, right? So how did that experience change from living in a car, not giving a fuck, wanting to take drugs and do all these things, to all of a sudden finding beauty in the sunlight? How does a psychedelic experience do that?
You know, it's a combination of things. It wasn't just the psychedelic experience. It was also losing the car. And, you know, because if I continued to take the car and I was able to continue living out of it and I was able to continue to supply my habit, I probably wouldn't have changed. I'd probably be dead. So it was almost a blessing that I crashed that car, because the only reason I wanted to stop was because I was at a rock bottom where I had no source of income to use drugs anymore. So
are you sorry to jump in there. Are you saying then that a person who turns up at the clinic who doesn't want to get better is not going to get better? Are you saying that the attitude is
absolutely.
not just the Ibogaine, you have to have the will and the desire to change?
Absolutely. I tell parents that all the time, because a lot of parents are desperate because they have a kid who's, you know, 20 years old, who's probably just gotten involved with drugs in the first place and probably isn't even over their head yet. And I'll talk to them. Does your kid really want to change? Can I speak to your kid? Because honestly, if they're not willing to do any of the footwork post-treatment, because Another thing I want to say is that Ibogaine's a detox. It gets you off the drugs in the most comfortable way possible and gives you a head start in your recovery, and you're feeling good post-treatment, but it's not a cure. A lot of people have to realize there's still footwork you need to do after. You need to get into some type of program. I avoid recommending people go to the 12-step programs, for a small percentage of people that do like it. If that works for you, okay. But you should also check out other things like Smart Recovery, and different models of it. CBT is great. There's all sorts of different approaches to addiction these days that are great, because you need to do something post-treatment to really help you develop coping skills to deal with things like triggers and urges. Because like I was saying, just because I'm clean right now, I haven't used heroin in 5 years, doesn't mean I don't forget what that's like. And at this point, I'm kind of past it. But in my first 6 months of recovery, if I had went home and I didn't relocate, if I went home, my neighbor was slinging dope right next door.
Right.
And I would have been triggered immediately, and I probably would have gone back to it in a matter of weeks. So I'm so grateful that I didn't go home. Not that you can't find drugs on any part of the world, and that's almost one of the worst things about alcohol is
Yeah.
billboards. It's not like you're driving down the highway and you see a billboard with a needle on it.
Yeah. No, it's
So,
absolutely everywhere.
Yeah. So I don't agree with the 12-step program, but after my treatment, I did go to it for a while, and I met some good people there. And I did pull a couple good things out of the program, like making amends. That's about it.
Yeah, but I mean, it sounds to me like the biggest game changer in Aeden Smith's life is, all right, you crash your car, and now you've really got to react. So that's a game changer. But I think the other milestone then is obviously doing the treatment. But then the third milestone is deciding to turn that around and help other people go through the same treatments that you did because it worked for you. And so by chucking yourself and throwing yourself into service and looking to help other people and being that bastion of light for Ibogaine, it makes it more difficult for you to then all of a sudden shoot up heroin, right? Because now you're breaking a new value bomb that you've introduced into your life, which is I'm Aeden Smith, the person who helps people quit heroin.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That plays a role in it. Doing what I do, working with these people every day is always a grave reminder of where I came from. Like I said, we get some bad people off the plane, and sometimes, picking them up at the airport and just driving with them, talking to them, it brings me back to that place. It's tough, but at the same time, it's such a beautiful experience to be able to watch these people change, and partaking in it too. And I don't just give myself credit; I give the staff more credit than I should ever take. I mean, the staff are wonderful, and they know what they're doing. They've been doing this for a lot longer than I have, and really, they're the ones that make this happen. But you also got to give the individual a lot of credit too for being willing to try this program and even come down here. It's a leap of faith. It really is. When I came down here, I didn't know if it was going to work. I really had no idea. I kind of wanted to try Ibogaine. But at the same time, too, I had pretty much exhausted out all of my other options aside from methadone and Suboxone, which were going to be my last resort. So, we figured we'll try Ibogaine. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But at least we'll try it. And then, going by myself all the way to Mexico to get picked up by strangers who I didn't know before, and you hear all sorts of rumors down here about this or that, being violent, and you're going to get kidnapped, and then you're going to do a drug that's potentially dangerous, and I mean, there's so many factors that would make your average person just say absolutely not. Especially parents. Talking to parents over the phone, it's really hard to make them comfortable. Even just coming to Mexico, it's just got such a reputation down here because of the war on drugs, what it's done in this country, which is absolutely shameful.
And let's talk about that a little bit. I mean, the reason that you had to go to Mexico is because Ibogaine is illegal in America, right? So why is that if it's a plant?
Well, it's a Schedule I substance, meaning the U.S. government, like marijuana, they don't believe it to have any medicinal value, and they also believe it to be a high probability of abuse, which just baffles my mind. With any other psychedelic, that's something you respect. That's not something you would want to do every day. And especially Ibogaine, it is far from recreational. And I couldn't imagine anybody after one experience ever wanting to do it again. I mean, me personally, I don't ever want to go through that experience again. I mean, I'm still learning about myself from my other experience. So the only way I would ever want to do it again is, you know, if I got in a bad car accident and I woke up on a morphine drip in a hospital. That's about the only way I would ever really want to do it again. I mean, it's something to respect. You have to respect. It's a sacred substance.
So that's one of the questions that somebody on my forum asked, actually, was because when you're uneducated about these things, the thought of taking a drug to get off a drug worries some people that they will then get addicted to the new drug.
Yeah, well, Ibogaine's not really a maintenance type drug, you know, like Suboxone or methadone would be, which is basically just a substitution. Ibogaine works one time. You do it one time, and it works on your receptors and that short of time. And yes, you take what's called a booster dose post-treatment, which is just a small amount of Ibogaine to keep the noribogaine levels up in your system so it can continue to work on your brain's receptors. But after that, I mean, it's not something you would crave. I can attest to that. I've never seen any patient be like, hey, can you give me more of that stuff? You know, it's probably the opposite. You know, sometimes we give them a booster dose and they say, oh, no, I don't want any more of that.
What's the difference between Ibogaine and ayahuasca then? Because that is happening with ayahuasca, right? People are turning what was ostensibly a spiritual experience into, well, I just want to keep doing it to get away from this world type of thing, which defeats the subject, you know, defeats a bit.
I mean, I haven't really read about that. I don't know much about it. But psychedelics in general, including ayahuasca, I wouldn't find them addictive. DMT, which is the primary active ingredient in ayahuasca, I've done that many times in my life, and I've done acid many, many times too, but not to the point where, like, I would take it before work because I needed it to function, or I would take it when I woke up because I couldn't get out of bed without it.
Yeah, I think what I've been reading more about is not you know, like we take alcohol and other drugs to kind of like space out, numb ourselves out, close down the pain, whatever. What I've been reading about ayahuasca is people enjoy the experience so much about being in this spiritual plane. They just want to get back there all the time, that all of a sudden life is boring because they've experienced this thing.
And I could see that because, you know, having been there and experienced it, it is one of the wildest things you can see as a human being. And, you know, they call it, you know, the US government will call it a hallucinogenic, but what it really is an extension of reality. And yeah, it kind of gives you a peek behind the curtains and shows you that there's a lot more than what we perceive as reality. There's so much more to it. And that, you know, this is probably actually a small percentage of what reality actually is, what we're experiencing here right now. So yeah, I could see some people being more interested in that side of things because I think there's a lot of space to explore in there. It's a whole consciousness that's infinite. So the limits in there are kind of endless. You can always get something new out of a psychedelic experience. But even still, even mentioning that, no, I don't agree with it. I've never met anybody who's gotten addicted to a psychedelic experience, and I've eaten it in stupid ways. Like when I was younger, I used to get sheets of acid, which is, you know, 100 hits, and I used to eat it pretty liberally. And, you know, it got to the point where I was able to eat, you know, 10 or 20 hits of acid in one night, which was, you know, if I didn't have a tolerance at that point, I'd probably end up on the 5th floor somewhere. But yeah, it never got to the point where, you know, I was taking it habitually. But yeah, I could see it becoming a problem that, you know, you're trying to alter your reality or escape from it.
So back to the original question then. So what's the difference between Ibogaine and ayahuasca? Is Ibogaine stronger experience?
Yeah, I would say so, but it all depends. It all depends on who makes your ayahuasca, your set and setting once again. You know, one ayahuasca trip you could have could be pretty mild. Then you could have another one that's, you know, blows your socks off. But Ibogaine and ayahuasca, from what I've heard other people describe it as, And one of the common ones is that ayahuasca is the motherly version of the psychedelic that's more warming, welcoming, and loving. And ayahuasca is the fatherly version that really just wants to teach you a lesson.
Ibogaine, you mean?
Yeah,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah. Yeah, that's what the person that I was speaking to who used it for her heroin problem. That was what she said. Basically, was the drug showed her where she had been such a bitch in her life and the dark areas of her life in a completely different way than cognitive behavioral therapy or counseling or hypnotherapy, you know? And she came out of that experience understanding that she needed to change more than all those other type of therapies. Although I still couldn't wrap my head around how, because it's almost like I want to be there in the experience to see it. And I guess that's because of my limited experience with psychedelics, you know.
So, well, one way I would describe psychedelics is bringing you into a third person's perspective, where you're not just looking at how somebody else acted, and you're also able to look how you're acting because you're from up here. So you're able to see both sides of the situation outside of your own ego. So it gives you that different perspective that a lot of times sitting here in my body with this ego, I will reject the reality of a situation, either because, it hurts my ego or I don't agree with it or this or that. And the Ibogaine kind of, psychedelics in general, I don't even want to just say Ibogaine, they kind of help you step outside of that and look at it from more of a reality, in my opinion. Because, if you've got two people arguing, each of them have, in their own minds, a valid opinion. But until you step out and you look at both of them outside of your own ego, you really have a limited understanding of, you have one side of it.
What happens when you mix, because you got me thinking now, all of my psychedelic experiences have been when I've been very drunk. What happens when you mix alcohol with psychedelics?
Bad news. I've done it before in the past, and I usually black out and have done some crazy stuff. So,
right.
Mixing psychedelics generally just isn't a good idea, especially with other non-psychedelics. I've mixed like acid and DMT before, and mixed Molly with mushrooms, which were actually pretty pleasant experiences. But I've also drank on acid before and blacked out and did some pretty regrettable things. Things I'm not proud of. And I've also drunkenly smoked DMT one time, and also had a very profound but really negative experience. And I came back to, and I was vomiting, and my brother was sitting in the room because we were all doing it together, and I was vomiting all over the floor, and like, dude, should we call an ambulance? And it's like, oh, I'm good.
Yeah, that's my problem. That's my problem. That's why I haven't been to the spiritual plane.
Yeah, well,
because I've always been pissed up.
I read an interesting article the other day about why alcohol, like liquors, are called spirits. And it's because this is what I read. I don't necessarily believe it, but it's interesting that when you drink alcohol, it lowers your vibration, so your spirit that's normally here in your body is absent, and then other entities can come into your body instead of your own, and that's when a blackout happens. That's when you leave your body, but something else comes in and takes over, where you do some crazy stuff, I thought it was interesting.
That article that you read was from Zita, who lives in Costa Rica.
Huh.
She's been a guest on the podcast, actually.
Oh, right on.
And yeah, I don't know if I don't believe that the spirit leaves and hangs on. I don't believe your soul leaves and hangs on and a new spirit comes in. However, the metaphor of your soul leaving and hanging on and an evil spirit coming in works perfectly for me for alcohol, because if you see someone who's sober and then you gradually take photographs of them with a Polaroid as they slowly get more and more drunk, you will see their face physically change.
Oh yeah.
And it will get angrier, more aggressive, darker, and that is where the metaphor that Zita was talking about comes in really, really handy. I was very surprised when I looked on your website that Ibogaine is used for treatment with people suffering problems with alcohol, because I just thought it was just heroin. I didn't think someone going through this spiritual experience would then be able to, just not drink again. Like, what?
I mean, it's most effective for alcohol, and I mean, sorry, most effective for opiates. And there aren't a whole heck of a lot of alcoholics that come down here, but they do come, and many of them have found success with it. But on the same note, other people came down here with that same expectation and didn't get what they needed out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So, which goes back to having that spiritual experience. So if they don't get the spiritual experience from the Ibogaine, sure, it still works on their neuroreceptors the same way and gets their endorphins flowing again and gets them feeling good right off the bat. But that doesn't mean they had the epiphany of what they're trying to mask, what they're running from, why they drink in the first place. So if they don't have that psychedelic experience, we do offer the 5-MeO DMT, but even then, it's still kind of like a gamble. It's hit or miss. Same with PTSD and depression. We've had troops come down from, we just got back from Iraq and Afghanistan, and they have some serious issues going on. And we've had them come down and do this treatment. And some of them found long-term success where, they were able to find peace with whatever issue it was. Other people found temporary success where it was almost like a Band-Aid. They were good for 8 months or something like that, but then the trauma or depression came back. And then there was other people that didn't get what they needed at all out of it. So, there's a lot of misleading things on Ibogaine that it cures Alzheimer's, it cures Parkinson's, it cures whatever you want to hear. What's wrong with you? Oh, it cures that. There's a lot of people that will mislead people into coming to them. And I think that's wrong, because Ibogaine's got the potential, like any psychedelic does. It's got a lot of potential to help with multiple different problems, but to guarantee somebody that it will work this way or won't work, or will guarantee to get you off this substance indefinitely, it's a cure. That's a fallacy. It's just not true.
It's the same with my courses that I run to help people quit alcohol. It's not anything it's not up to me. It's up to you, right? I mean, if you want to stop drinking alcohol, you're the gatekeeper. You're holding all the keys to every single problem. My course will help you, but you ultimately will take all the actions needed for you to get clear. And it sounds to me like Ibogaine's the same. You need to have an open mind. You need to be up for it, really fucking up for it, right? Mm-hmm. To have taken the vow that this enough. I'm going to change my life no matter what, right? And then after you've had the experience, you've really got to be committed to all the work of filling the white space, because I call it the white space when we quit drinking alcohol and suddenly you're not thinking about alcohol anymore. So all those thoughts are now, there's empty space in your mind that are going to get filled with all other kinds of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And your experiences, like, physically are different because you're not going to the pub anymore. You're not going to the shop to buy liquor. So you have all this space in front of you. And if you don't fill it right, there's a real risk that you could end up drinking again because you think life is boring. And I imagine if you come out of an Ibogaine experience and it's been really positive for you, then you're going to be wanting to fly. You're probably going to say to yourself, wow, my job is shit. My relationships are shit. Everything about my life is shit. And I really want to change it all. Boom. Now, if you don't have that get up and go and the support system to help you go for it, I can imagine you could trip up a little bit and lose a bit of, will to get on, a bit of enthusiasm to get on, do it. What kind of aftercare plan do you have, or do you have an aftercare plan after they've gone through the treatment?
We recommend stuff between Smart Recovery, seeing an addiction therapist or a specialist, or seeing a psychologist, getting into an inpatient or outpatient program. Some people don't have a heck of a lot of money, so they're forced to do free programs. But I agree with you 100%. When you stop using drugs, now you have all this time or alcohol, from coming up with money to buy the drugs or alcohol, actually physically going to get the drugs or alcohol, consuming the drugs or alcohol, and then recuperating from the drugs and alcohol. And that can take up a whole day. That's a lot of time. So when you discontinue this, you have this huge void that's just empty, and you need to be able to fill it with healthy activities. So we always recommend a healthy diet, juicing, eating lots of greens, stay away from the red meat. Exercising is huge, getting the endorphins flowing in your head just naturally by, even going to the gym for a half hour every day. It can make all the difference. And also being constructive and proactive with your life. Going home, and just because you're eating right and exercising doesn't mean you should go sit on your mom's couch and watch TV for 5 hours a day, because when you're sitting around stagnating, that's when you come up with bad decisions. You become bored, and boredom is a huge factor in relapse. So you got to stay busy, and you can do that between getting a job, going back to school, furthering your career. There's so many different things you can do, but there's also no one path to recovery. So we don't say, hey, this program is going to work for you. It's a one size fits all. We have to work with the patient to discover what's going to work best for them, because, only knowing them on the phone up until when they get down here, and then the week that they're here, I know limited things about their life and who they are. So they need to be a part of the process and finding out what's going to be a good fit for them, because, you can't just, you go throw somebody who doesn't believe in God into a 12-step program. It's not going to work for them. And it's not going to work for a lot of people, regardless of what their beliefs are. So you don't want to just, force somebody into a program that they're not going to agree with. And some people like the 12-step, and if it works for somebody, more power to them. But, chances are they wouldn't be coming to see us in the first place if the 12-step works so well for them. So I always, try to just run that through their head real quick. And if it rings a bell, we offer some alternatives like Smart Recovery, which is a great one. But like I said, there's no one path to recovery, and there's so many factors like, okay, do they have a family to get back to? Kids to get back to? Do they have to get back to school? Do they have to get back to a job? What's their financial situation? So there's Ibogaine-centered aftercares in the U.S. and in Mexico that are great because they incorporate all these things like going to hyperbaric chambers or oxygen tanks, float tanks, doing yoga, meditation, healing gongs and healing bowls, all these cool things that are, great, and they can introduce you to further the ones that you're interested further on in your life when you get out of that program, and to integrate it in your own life. But at the same time, doing all this stuff, you could probably only do all of that every day if you had a ton of money and nothing to do all day. Yoga to the gym, to hot yoga, to the pool, to, it'd be nice if you could just do that all day, every day. But you got to bring reality into your aftercare plan too.
It's too expensive just having a yoga class.
No. Yeah.
I'm broke after that. Aeden, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show and talking about a very interesting a topic. It's something that I always wanted to talk about, actually, having known somebody who's gone through the experience. I'll make sure to put all the links to your Facebook page and your website. And is it all right if people have got a lot of questions that they can post them? I can send them to you. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. And, thank you for having me on. This is my first podcast. I hope I did all right and was able to put enough information out there. And Lee, I wouldn't mind coming back again and doing another topic like the failed war on drugs, or the privatized prison industry, or pharmaceutical companies along with, the whole war on drugs. We could talk about that for, hours. Never mind. I'm sure you and I could get into a good one on the 12-step program.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. I will consider that in some, I will consider having you back on in some area. You know what? This is the truth. I'm going to try to never have the same guest on twice on the podcast, but we have lots of other ways of sharing your work and your stories and videos and that kind of stuff. So yeah, we'll definitely do something together.
Yeah, I just, touching on the war on drugs, that's the primary factor of why people use drugs and alcohol in the first place. And it's a for-profit scam. So it's just, a lot of people should wake up to the fact of the government's role in drug abuse and their responsibility in the matter, which is interesting.
That definitely sounds like
maybe you could have that guest, that topic with another guest.
No, no, no. We can get you on. We can do something. It just won't be on this podcast, but it'll be on a different forum. But yeah, definitely. Aiden, thank you very much for joining us, my friend. You take care of
Thank you
yourself.